Hello everyone, welcome back to the EFL Magazine Business Podcast. This is episode 15. Today's guest is Dean Rogers. Dean is CEO of Dean Morgan KK, which owns the Rosetta Stone Learning Center and Hummingbird Pronunciation School brands. He's based in Japan. He did his undergraduate studies at UCLA and completed Harvard Business School's Owner's President Management Program. He first started in ERP Software and then eventually went on to own his own schools in Japan. In 2015, a business alliance with Rosetta Stone Inc. was established and the school chain was rebranded as Rosetta Stone Learning Centers. I really hope you enjoy today's show.
Hey everyone, buckle up for a new episode of the EFL Magazine Business Podcast, the one and only podcast made to help you launch your business or take your existing business to a level of success you could never have imagined. Whether you're a school owner, freelancer, publisher, or other entrepreneur, you're sure to pick up lots of actionable advice when you listen to the EFL Magazine Business Podcast. Remember to visit eflmagazine.com for great articles and features. Without further ado, here's your host, the founder of EFL Magazine, Philip Pound.
Welcome again, everybody, to the EFL Magazine Business Podcast. And today it's my great pleasure to introduce to you Dean Rogers. Dean, how are you today?
Good, thanks. Thanks for having me on.
And Dean tell me a little bit about your business background and your companies and what you're doing at the moment.
Originally born and raised in Santa Barbara, California. Took Japanese at UCLA when I was in college, got interested in particular, it was international business and chose Japanese as a language and came over here during the summer and had some really amazing experiences and kind of fell in love with the country a little bit, learned the language through college. And then I had started pretty young, actually, on the business side. I was very into investing and kind of obsessed with the idea of money working for you, not just working for money. And so had started as an intern at a private money management firm when I was about 15, worked all the way through college for them, became a portfolio manager, built kind of a financial background, if you will, at the beginning, and then really wanted to come to Japan. So decided to make a career shift and joined a big ERP software company, came over as an expat, and about 3-4 years in, had made a lot of friends with teachers. And, when I was in school, I studied language, but I also did some tutoring and whatnot. And I always enjoyed teaching and kind of came to the conclusion that I really wanted to change my career fully and get into education and make that my kind of last career that I was going to do. So going from finance to technology, software. And that's when I started Dean Morgan KK and started building our first school and kind of growing from there.
Fantastic. And how long are you in Japan now?
I've been in Japan, this year will be 20 years.
Oh, wow. Your Japan anniversary, 20 years. And tell me a little bit about coming here at the beginning, what you worked in. Tell me about your job and then how you
I worked for
education.
ERP software company, enterprise resource planning software company, logistics, retail, all that kind of stuff. And came over as an expat. So to be honest, it was a bit of a cushy start compared to, I'd say, your average Eikaiwa teacher or educator who comes over and, a lot of times you're in a dormitory and stuff. It was a company paid for apartment, flights a couple times a year, paid for in Hiro, right? Nice areas. But after about 2-3 years, again, like I said, I started actually moonlighting on the weekends, teaching at schools. I was really starting to get into the idea of starting my own school. And so I taught for over a year at some well-known brands on the weekends and was able to kind of really get an idea of how I wanted to launch my school and launch my business. But I came over, it was pretty easy start. I had a big company behind me and, big office and all that kind of stuff, but decided to step away and start a little school and, with the dream of doing something a lot bigger. Obviously, I had a business and a finance background, so I was able to raise my own capital and then also raise investor capital to try and go after something that would be a little bit more scaled. than just a single school operation.
Okay, so not your typical story. You came over as a salaried employee for a big company, and you decided to moonlight in Eikaiwa, which is with the idea of setting up your own enterprise.
Yeah, I was doing my due diligence, frankly speaking. It wasn't really much for the money. It was really the due diligence, and then also building relationships with some great teachers. And then identifying some of the things that worked and didn't work and how I would want to start my business. So I took my time over the course of probably about a year and a half before I actually established the company and then launched our first school.
Okay. And what did you learn in that year?
A lot of things. The number one lesson for me back then, you got to remember, this is 17 years ago. Everybody was still faxing in schedules.
Still are in Japan.
I know. And I remember one of the schools I was teaching at, which was actually in Jugaoka. There was no online scheduling system, and I was coming out of software. I was working weekdays at a big international global software company, and so I actually started talking to the manager there about scheduling software, and actually helped kind of work on some of the ideas behind their first online software program. But so kind of came at it right away from, it's a really analog industry that's, 30 years behind where it should be. And then the other lessons I learned were things like, for example, I think one of the things that got me interested in the business side is that, I made a lot of friends with teachers over the years that I've been in Japan, 3-4 years at that point. And people were really passionate about their students. They love their students. They love teaching and didn't have a lot of positive things to say about the companies that they worked for. And it's not true of everybody, but I think in general, especially back then, it was pretty critical of the companies. And so kind of maybe had the hubris of thinking I could build a company that was more people-centric and employee-focused, and that we would be able to achieve a higher level of both efficacy and customer engagement by focusing on actually engaging our employees first. So that became kind of a central theme around the founding of our business was, building cutting edge or leading edge technology in the industry, but also at the same time, both for education, but also for the enterprise side, right? So for business, managing the business, and then also building a very employee-centric business model that our goal has always been the customer second equals the best customer service. That's one of our core value phrases. And so we built a lot of the business around that. And those were probably the two biggest takeaways that came for me.
Okay, so employees first. Similar to Richard Branson has something similar, doesn't he?
There's a couple of great companies out there that I think have built very employee-focused and employee-engaging models of business where, it's always an imperfect science, to be honest, but you stay accountable to that through, heavy survey usage and being very transparent and open with your employees. And it's not always a fit for everybody. I think pretty much anybody who's ever done an interview with me, I only make one guarantee, and that's that we will inevitably disappoint you, right? We are a business. You are individuals from different countries and different backgrounds and different expectations, but we're all good people working very hard to create a great company to both work for and for our students to study at. And that's always been kind of at the founding core values of our business. Highlighted by that customer second, which every teacher that ever has an interview with me, it's one of the questions they ask, of course.
And tell me, you heard a lot of complaints from teachers about their companies. What kind of complaints, and what did you learn from?
Just, I think the biggest thing was a lack of value, being seen as a kind of a disposable resource to a large degree. No career opportunities whatsoever. I think probably, I would say more than half the teachers I've met in my career, I don't think they consider teaching as their primary skill set. They study something else in college. Their passion or hobby is something different, and they kind of do teaching for work, and they're good at it, and they're passionate about it, and they love doing the work. But they kind of, I'm a tech guy who teaches, or, I'm a curriculum designer who also teaches. And so we wanted to be able to leverage those skills and give them the opportunity to be able to develop career outside of just teaching. And so a lot of our original marketing and website designs and all of our curriculum, it's always been developed internally by teachers who had skills above and beyond just teaching language.
Oh, I see. So all the design of the websites, everything is from teachers themselves.
Up till about 2-3 years ago, when we joined, when I sold the business to a big, tier 1 public company. Now we're part of a $1 billion business, and with that, we now have a big marketing team that focuses on it, and teachers still contribute to that, right? So yesterday we had a meeting about the website needs to be updated and redesigned. It's getting mid-aged, and that was driven internally by actually some of our teacher people who are interested in marketing. Our Facebook engagement with employees is done by teachers who are interested in Facebook and Instagram and this kind of marketing avenues, where the Japanese parent company we have is not actually very good at that per se. And there was a lot of passion towards this. Someone studying this in school, doing their master's degree, and wanted to leverage those skills practically. And we were happy to give them the avenue to do that, and also benefit as a business from it, and improve our recruiting, outreach through not just using Gaijinpod or jobs in Japan, but reaching out through Facebook's or Instagram to the right demographic. And so that's all been kind of teacher led.
And when you started the company initially, or you were doing your due diligence, what level did you want to get into? So where did you see a gap in the market that you
for us,
better?
We very much jumped on the man-to-man focus as a company. And a primary reason for that, I think GABA in particular had a real good launch and growth curve. And we were looking to kind of come in second behind them as a new player. They were only, probably 4 or 5 years into being an actual physical school business. Yoshino-san, the CEO, he had built an online business similar to like the online model now, using cafe and introduction services, right? And he flipped that business, used the database, and then built GABA off that customer base. And we felt there was a good opportunity in the man-to-man market, which was going through very rapid growth versus the more slow, stagnant growth of a mature market of the general Eikaiwa market. So looking at sectors within the language learning market that were growing at more of an exponential rate, and the man market had a much higher growth curve. And I like that model of learning anyways. I like the one-on-one time with students. I enjoyed group lessons, but for me, I've always felt the ability to focus on one student and their specific needs was a model that I could get behind more, I guess.
Okay, so for listeners who are not in Japan, could you describe GABA's business model and how they work and price?
GABA's, it's man-to-man, so one-on-one lessons. Japanese in Japan market say man-to-man. But one-on-one lesson type, they build very nice kind of luxurious style schools. That's been kind of their core model. We focus more on a little bit on the efficacy side, and with nice layouts and designs, obviously. But that core man-to-man, one-on-one market, until GABA really created the one-to-one market, there wasn't really a defined one. There were schools that offered one-on-one lessons, but it wasn't perceived as kind of a separate business model and a separate way of learning. It was kind of blended all together into language learning. And so they really broke out with that model and made it an established kind of mode of learning with a high value perception. And so the prices were generally higher as well. And did an excellent job doing that.
And how did you see you could compete with them or do better than them?
Yeah, so from our side, it was leveraging, first off, the recruiting and retention of employees rather than the higher turnover. Definitely the better technology, both for learning, so e-learning and things like that, getting integrated very early into our system. The textbook development we did fairly early on was fairly sophisticated within the first 4 or 5 years. So that wasn't the first year type thing. We worked with Oxford and other solid textbook makers in the first couple of years, but we're very keen on bringing textbooks and curriculum designed for one-on-one lessons. Because if you buy general textbooks, for example, Market Leader, and which have been kind of stand-in solid textbooks for years in the industry, they're sold. The same book is sold in Spain, sold in China, sold in South America, sold in Korea. There's no customization towards man-to-man or for the Japanese market. So our goal was to build curriculum that was specifically designed for one-on-one lessons And then second to that is specifically designed for Japanese learners, because you can shorten the cycle for learning by focusing on developing product that specifically meets the needs of the customer rather than trying to design something that you can sell all over the world. We're not a curriculum company. We didn't want to sell one type textbook that could sell all over the world for group and man-to-man. We wanted to specialize and really focus that specialization to improve the efficacy and learning cycle for the student and the speed of learning.
Okay. And you mentioned about recruitment and retention. What in the market in Japan for companies maybe like GABA, what is the retention rate?
Generally, I'm probably a little bit out of date, but over the first decade or so of running the business, when I really followed it closely, it was average probably about 2.5 years at a school, right? People stay longer sometimes, but about 2 to 2.5 years. Some companies even shorter, some a little bit longer. In our first 10 years, we averaged about 6 to 7 years retention. Now, as we've scaled and grown, I think we're probably more in the 4.5 year range, which is still a lot longer than the average for the industry, I would say.
Okay, and some tips for retention of teachers?
Yeah, I mean, engage your employees. I think transparency, communication, a lot of small owners in particular, I think, are a little bit scared about how much information they should share with their employees. Don't do ad hoc sharing, really create a process. You're going to share quarterly. You're going to have a quarterly general meeting. You're going to have regular distribution of information. If it's customer feedback, it's going to be regularly met with. You're going to have regular employee engagement sessions whether or not it's their performance reviews or whatnot. Even in a small business, run it like a bigger business, right? If your goal is to maybe scale it up a little bit, then start running it as you would like to run it at a larger scale, and you'll get there. The probability of you getting there will improve. Not necessarily will for sure, but you kind of it's always the kind of dress to success, right? You dress or you act or you work at the level that you want to achieve, not the level that you're at now. And so I think that serves as well for any, kind of whether it's an employee or a small business owner who wants to scale their business to the next size, to kind of perform above or set your processes in place for how you run your business in line with the kind of business you want to be rather than just where you are now. So it's very ambitious, I think. And we did that from day one. We had a small group of investors. I produced an annual report that was extraordinarily detailed, like a professional, 20-page detailed graphs, all of everything that we were doing in the company. And by doing that and being very open about the way that we ran our business, that we were looking to scale and grow and either IPO the business or eventually be acquired and become a major player. I think we were open and transparent about that. And we acquired employees who specifically wanted to be in that kind of environment. The biggest mistake is kind of hide what you want to do. And then people are disappointed because they have different expectations. So that transparency, that regular communication and creating a process around that, I think will allow you to build strong trust with your employees and listen to them. I mean, that whole communication process is not a one-way communication. It's a two-way communication.
And so at the beginning, you started out with one school. Tell me about starting the company, where you were at, how many teachers, your marketing and...
Yeah, so we did start one school at Shinjuku. So I, moved out of my nice, expat apartment hero and moved to a little 23 square meter apartment in Shinjuku near the office. And, had recruited actually 2 teachers that I had worked with or met along my kind of cycle of cruising around teaching at other schools during that kind of due diligence period. We rented out our first location, which was an interesting experience. I had to have 4 hoshonin, 4 guarantors. It was like, my board members, and one's a 3rd generation CEO of a $100 million company. That wasn't enough. I had to get another buddy who was CEO of a $150 million company as a foreigner. We had a prime location in Shinjuku.
Okay.
Rent was pretty high. And, we put, I think, $450,000 into the deposits and the build out of that school. And so it was a major investment. And, we were their longest tenant ever. They're ripping the building down now. And we moved to the building next door recently, but in the last year or so, but we were there for 15 years. And still was always treated kind of like a foreigner. The owner's like 90 years old, and, I'd go in there and it was very dismissive. And I think that's some of the challenges that you'll face as a foreigner, even in modern Japan. I probably got rejected 1 out of every 4 locations we went to look at, whether or not it was for me renting a place personally or whether or not it was for a place we were going to use. And they're just very blatantly and open about, we don't rent to foreigners, or we don't want to. Usually it's, some 85-year-old grandmother who owns the building and she's not comfortable reading. I don't speak English. And it's okay. I speak Japanese. The real estate will come back and say no. So I think there are some unusual challenges. And for us, I think finding locations, getting okayed for locations. When you're a new business, you're not trusted. I think a lot of people think that it's because you're a foreigner, but probably half of those were in the early days were just because we were a new company. We didn't have much credit history or anything like that. And Japanese trying to do the same thing without a grandfather or father who's very wealthy and would be the guarantor would also face a lot of the similar challenges.
So was it as much about having a lineage, a track record, being an established name, a company? Yeah.
Japan, the kind of Kyuseicho, the explosive rapid growth, and everybody just says, "Oh, great!" Japan doesn't have any unicorns. Unicorn is like $1 billion unlisted, not listed company. They've had one in the last 20 years, like Meokari. Things go slow here, and so that patience, I think, is somewhat challenging if you're ambitious and wanting to grow a big business. And I definitely did, and I think that was probably a frustration for me. Probably most of your listeners are looking to just run their own small school. So a lot of times there it's, finding a good location, finding location near, whether it's a junior high school or an elementary school, or that's got a lot of traffic, good residential area. Again, we do adults only. We don't do kids school teaching. So it's a little bit different. And I think a lot of the small school owners I encounter who have very kind of wide open, okay, junior high school adults will kind of do everything. We decided to be very focused and specialized in what we want to deliver: man-to-man, adults only, big city center locations, and go scale. So a little bit different, I'd say. But the early marketing, another part of your question would be, we just did a lot of flyering. I think that's your kind of go-to, get your message out. I probably had the highest efficacy rate or success rate because I'm the owner and I'm out there, with a big smile and saying, come on into my school. And, every single student, just kind of one by one added to 10, and then it got eventually to 20, and then it got to 50, and then I got to 100, and then it got to 300, and then eventually 500. And eventually I couldn't get out there and do all the flying. And so we had to start building a marketing team and a sales team and starting to build it out properly. But, you can bootstrap it for a while. But eventually, if you get to a certain scale, you got to look to go beyond what you're doing and build teams that can actually develop and grow those functions better than you can.
That's interesting. You brought up the point of being a foreigner handing out the flyers, because I think there's some schools in Japan, they don't actually employ foreign teachers at all, just Japanese teachers teaching English because they feel that some Japanese are uncomfortable learning from foreigners. Is that true?
Again, I guess it's case by case. And, if you're in an area where maybe there is kind of a bit of a bias towards, and I would say it's probably with students or parents who want kids to pass a test, then probably the perception of having a Japanese teacher who understands the Japanese testing system might be, perceived as superior. It's parents who are really interested in their kids becoming bilingual, or having a high skill level and fluency in English, are probably going to lean generally towards a native speaker, because that's their goal for their child is to get the highest level of fluency possible. And, the saddest thing I see is kids stop taking English at about 9, 10, 11 years old as they get close to that kind of juken senso, getting into high school, getting into college, and it's such a critical period, right? Just from generally speaking, these kids who grow up like 9, 10 years here in Japan, and then they move back to for example, I'm from the US, and most of them lose most of their Japanese. And did a little bit of research on this. And basically it has to do with hormones. When you go through puberty, it pretty much locks. So anybody who's speaking a language up through about 15 or 16, they're pretty much fluent the rest of their life. But if you stop at 11, the fall off is quite significant. And so I think that's a great sales tactic for school owners or small school owners who are struggling to keep kids in, is get that research, put it out there, put it in front of parents, and let them know this is the critical time. Actually, the next 3 to 4 years, rather than start them at 2 and taking them till they're 9, start them at 8 and take them till they're 15, and you'll have fluent speakers, right?
And you started your career at 15, didn't you? So
yeah, I was pretty early. I was a bit of an odd kid, right? In that sense, I really had ambition for, working in finance first. So I rode my bicycle around to all the Shokengaisha, the securities companies, brokerage companies in my hometown in a suit trying to get a job, and no one would give me a job. And finally ran into the CEO of a really nice boutique money management firm on the golf course. And I was a pretty good golfer in high school, and impressed him enough to get a job interview. And he was actually the first investor in my company, over a decade later when I started Dean Morgan. I presented to him, and he said, I don't know anything about Japan. I don't know anything about language schools, but I've seen you work for 10 years and I'd invest in you. And once he did, the ball kind of rolled, and a lot of people got behind me. And we were able to raise just under $1 million. And that gave us the founding seed money to really focus on building the business in the way that I had the ambition of doing, which is building a large scale enterprise.
Okay. So you started your first school in Shinjuku. You had a couple of teachers, and tell me about what happened after that.
Well, I mean, we royally failed in the first year, right? So after I think we opened the doors in July, and by December I had like 18 students with, there was a lot of hubris in the early days, right? We had raised $1 million. I was 26 years old, felt like, 27 years old, felt like king of the world. For having done that. But I think that hubris came to roost pretty quick. We had rented a little small office next door, and, the teachers were teaching, we were managing, quote unquote. And, our running costs were too high. By the end of the year, we had 18 students in total. We're losing money significantly. And at that time, I realized we had to downsize quickly, or else we were going to run out of money. And so we closed down the office. I got back into Gemba in the front office, in the front lines, and started really teaching and getting close with the customers. Recruited a really good sales guy who helped us out a lot getting off the ground, and really then started to get some traction. Had to buy out my partner, Dean Morgan. Actually, it was a Morgan that he wanted out. We were on a crashing, dying. I mean, we signed the papers and walking out the door, his last words were, you guys are dead, right? I think it was something like that was the last words. And I had a lot of money, and I had my family and my friends' money in the business. And, I was committed to seeing it through and successful, and ended up being about 4 years without a salary and about 5,000 lessons taught for free. But we're able to transition through that, start to get scale, start to open our next schools. And probably after 2 years, I probably could have started taking a salary, but I was still focused on, we got to preserve the business and got to, get that next step and that next scale. And I had enough limited assets to be able to survive that period without having to take a salary from the business. So
okay,
in that regard.
And so for people who are not too familiar with Japan, is most schools are like in the big areas like Shinjuku, Ikebukuro, they're within 10 minutes of the station, aren't they? Walking distance, usually.
Yeah, I mean, it's a station front business. So the closer you are to the station, and it's circles of price, right? So if you're 30 seconds from the station, the rent's going to be higher. 1 minute's going to be a little bit cheaper. 2 minutes can be a little cheaper. 3 minutes can be a little cheaper. 10 minutes can be a lot cheaper, right? 20 minutes to the nearest station is going to be really cheap, and hard to find 20 minutes actually, from a station. It's between, you have multiple stations around any area. And so there's always a proximity, but the farthest from the stations are going to be the cheapest rent. So, you want to be near where the customers and the traffic are. And so proximity to station does matter if you're in the big city center. So rural is a little bit different. You're looking around schools, elementary schools, this kind of tactic is going to be probably more appropriate. But if you're looking to build a branded business, generally speaking, in Japan, it's proximity to the station, and it's expensive.
So yours was what, 1-2 minutes from the station?
Correct. Yeah. All of our schools have always been in good close proximity to the station.
Mm. Yeah. So tell me about the relationship with your partner. Went a little bit
Yeah, no, it wasn't bad. It was just that the business itself was dying, right? We were collapsing. And, I had put up the original capital. So on my side, I think his level of personal exposure or risk was less. And I think he felt it was a failed venture at this point, and was keen to move on with his life, which he'd done. And he's become a successful entrepreneur in his own right, done a couple of other businesses. And, like I said, I had my friends and my family very deeply. Probably 95% of the capital raised was through me. He had a couple of friends who did quite well, actually, when we sold the business in France and other places. He's French, and very talented linguist, like spoke 6-7 languages, and Japanese to like EQ level in like 18 or 20 months. So very talented linguist. And but he's French and I'm American. That's also tough. I think his business partners can be very challenging. It's a very different mindset. We have a lot of French employees, great employees with us, but I think that was a challenge. And then, I think in the early days, you're struggling, and leadership and direction. We had kind of 2 CEOs. It was very confusing, I think, for our employees, and it worked out, I think, best that he chose on, and we were able to kind of dig down and really rebuild the business from the foundation up again after a year. But it was a pretty tough grind. I mean, I had to sell some assets and get some extra liquidity. Some investors put in some additional capital, and then we started to get some slow traction. I think there's a lot of youthful hubris on both sides, to be honest. And I think it's tough, though, when you have to walk away and think something's a failure. And both of our youthful enthusiasm as he walked out the door, those kind of last words were like, okay.
But did you feel like walking away at some stage? I mean, did the thought go across your mind? Maybe he's right. Or?
Every entrepreneur has the thought once in a while, but for me, it was not very deep. I mean, I had, again, a huge investment personally, and then the bigger one was friends and family, right? I had family who had chosen to invest in me, and walking away from the commitments I had made to them, just something I wasn't capable of doing. Even when you have self-doubts like any entrepreneur does, you keep driving on day in and that perseverance, I think, is one of the key success factors that a lot of speakers talk about when they're talking about entrepreneurs and successful people, is the ability to persevere through tough times. It would have been much easier to just say, I'm out of here, and head back to the expat life. It was a pretty good life. Apartments paid for, very nice salary, and instead I'm choosing to grind away teaching lessons for free. But I made commitments, and I had a specific dream of what I wanted to accomplish, and that was just kind of my guiding light. That the combination of the obligation to those people and the fact that this is what I wanted to do, and I had a lot of people who believed in that dream, and teachers who liked the ideas and the core concepts we espoused as a company, customers who enjoyed the lessons and wanted to see that successful. And it's done pretty good.
So more skin in the game, basically.
I think that's the thing that kept me more than anything else, is that I had more skin than him when you're talking. And so he was fairly limited. I had put up his side of the original Shihonkin, the paid-in capital. And so from his point of view, I think he was a little bit, after a year and we were grinding and losing money and it looked like we were going to probably fail, he wanted to move on before the ship sunk. And I was happy to, let him move on. And then that allowed me to really focus and downsize and control cost a lot more aggressively. And we moved back to profitability, or we moved to profitability within a year or so, break even-ish, and then just ground and just kept moving. And eventually started to get a little more traction, was able to open a second school, then acquire a small school, and we acquired a pronunciation brand, and then eventually kind of scaled all organically. Then 13 years later, I ended up doing Rosetta Stone, and acquired part of their brand and some customer data and things like that from them. And then we did another round of investment at that point before being acquired by Lincoln Motivation Group.
Okay. So all your schools in Tokyo or outside? Or
Osaka, Tokyo. We now actually cover about 90 centers around Japan. So organically, we've grown to about 10 direct schools. And then when we sold the business to Lincoln Motivation Group, they also own the Aviva and DIA chains, which Aviva is a PC school, so Office, C++, coding, huge chain of 100 plus schools. And DIA is a certification school, which in particular, things like your Tuck-in real estate license test, or you want to become a tax accountant, you get your certification at these schools. They have over 100 of these schools. And so part of our business plan when we talked to Lincoln Motivation about acquisition was integrating into those schools. And so we integrated into over 90 schools alongside our direct branches.
Okay. So you mentioned earlier about putting together a financial plan. What was it, 20 pages?
So
like
that's
that?
our annual report, to shareholders.
Yeah. So for some people, that's daunting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Dealing with just day-to-day figures, but putting together 20-page documents. So can you give how is this something people can learn online? Do they have to go to business school?
Nah, I mean, you don't have to go to business school to do something. I mean, it's, to be honest, the easiest way is just copy existing. I mean, when I was familiar with reading, financial statements and whatnot, obviously from working in finance, but my model was I went out and looked at all the public companies that I had stock in or that I thought were great brands and just found a bunch of great annual reports and then said, okay, I like this template. I like the way this is laid out, and put together a similar set of information and get some of the information from our accountants. Some of it's internal that we were tracking. I was tracking, or my COO was tracking. And then we put together, nice simple graphs showing our, revenue and profitability and, teacher retention and interviews, sections with the CEO and the COO and, new teachers that joined the company this year, profiles. And then I just used, at that time it was Elance. Now it's called Upwork, freelance services. And I think we had a designer in Lithuania, I believe, who was doing the design and layout in InDesign for us for like $300. And it looked like a $500 million company presentation. And for me, it was like, the way we ran our business, the way we ran our meetings, even as a small company. I think, some less sophisticated people might think it's very kind of, excessively ambitious, but that's where we wanted to run our business. And so putting the pieces in place at an early stage, whether that's the annual report or the way we ran our weekly meetings, were more in line with the company. It was probably larger than we were at that time. I think researching this is pretty easy. I mean, you can learn what you want. You're talking about creating just a report. I mean, everybody's done a report in college. Everybody's done a report in high school. You're adding a little bit, maybe more fancy graphics. And if you're not a designer, use something like Upwork. Find a designer who will put the layout and make it look really professional for you. And rather than doing it in PowerPoint, I originally would do it in PowerPoint, send it over to them, and then they would come up with 2 or 3 design layouts and say, this is how we'd like to do to make it look really good. And I would send several annual reports as samples that I thought were really well polished and that would align with how we were looking to make our annual report look. And so I always shared those annual reports with our employees as well. So it came back to, we weren't even shareholders always, though we did share ownership with teachers and employees. The idea there was, again, transparency. Everybody's a stakeholder. You may not be a shareholder, but everybody's a stakeholder. Their job, the performance of the company is very much dependent on the performance of our teachers and our employees and their passion and commitment to delivering great lessons and a high retention rate with students, all linked together. So for me, sharing that information was a no-brainer, and also bringing up kind of the business IQ. Teacher population, I think, was important for helping them understand how we were trying to drive and run the business.
So besides the look and the graphics of a presentation or annual plan, so what financials look good to a potential investor or to stakeholders? So what should people concentrate on?
When you look at investors and to raise, you're kind of pie in the sky stuff, right? So from here, I'm going to build this and I'm going to do this. I mean, definitely it's, your revenue generation, what your forecasts are for revenue, profitability, when you're going to become profitable, or if you're profitable from day one, where and how money is going to be allocated. Simple graphs are pretty straightforward. Very smart to use any kind of case study you can against it. So in our case, like Gabo was a publicly traded company. So we used a lot of their data and metrics and said, here's the growth rate that was that they achieved. This is how we plan on achieving a similar type growth rate or even better growth rate. And so putting that together based off of actual cases of businesses. There have been a lot of acquisitions in the industry over the years. And so here's some of the valuations based on acquisitions that were done. Right. So rather than just pure pie in the sky, is taking wherever you can actual cases. So here's acquisitions that were done. Here's a growth story of a public company. So all the data is very visible and you can look at it and say, here's the growth rate. Here's the profitability of that business. Here's where we're forecasting based on similar metrics. And so, it sounds like fancy words, but, you're basically just looking online and saying, okay, this is a public company. Here's the information and kind of, copy and rinse and repeat, and then add your own flavor. How are you going to do it? How is this company and how are you going to develop your brand? Some things like, how you're going to market, how you're going to sell, all these things are important, and how you're going to build the brand. But those things are kind of, anybody can achieve them. Anybody can do the research to do it. And these days, there's so much information available on the internet on just how to do something. So if you want to create an annual report, I'm sure there's a video, there's lots of write-ups. It's just the desire to actually do it and do it in a professional way, and then just put work into getting your first version. And by the time you're doing your second year and your third year, it gets better and better as you get better and better and more familiar with doing the process of building an annual report or building a investor pitch deck, what you're kind of referring to a little bit. But in pitch deck, you need financials. There's a cap table, which is the capitalization table, who owns how much shares and where, what's the value based on. Those are all simple things that anybody can look up if they want to raise money for a small business. But,
okay. Excellent advice there. Yeah.
The only thing I add would be the level of investors that your average, small A Kiowa school owner is going to go after is going to be friends and family. But you still run it and put together a pitch deck that's professional. My first investors were all friends and family. Only in later stages where we got beyond that and brought in some investors who were, I would say, more professional investors, if you will.
So that's a good point to get onto that. So from going from friends and family to being bought out by major international company like Rosetta Stone. Yeah.
Well, we sold. So there's two stages. So Rosetta Stone acquired a small share in us, and we acquired part of their business in Japan. And then after doing that deal with Rosetta Stone, they took a minority share in our company. A year later, we then sold the company to a Japanese company called Lincoln Motivation. They also own Interact, which you would know.
Oh, I know. Yeah, Interact. So that's Lincoln, like
L-I-N-K and A-N-D, Motivation.
Okay. Oh, gotcha. Okay. Mm.
And so Rosetta Stone basically they had gone public as a company, IPO'd on the Japan story. So Japan is like the second largest language learning market in the world. We're going to launch our business in Japan. And so they took their company public, IPO, and on, I think this US Stock Exchange. They went, but this is probably, it's well over a decade ago. And when they went public on it, they spent a lot of money here, but they tried to do it direct. And doing a direct business launch in Japan is tough. Right? Usually it's good Japanese partners. You build out a joint venture, and maybe after 10 years or so, you buy out the joint venture is the more standard way of doing it. And so they were struggling and looking to withdraw from the market. And it allowed us to kind of work out a great deal with them to acquire their brand and, some customer-based stuff as well that would help us strengthen our brand and our brand recognition. And that actually then created deal flow. There's a lot of companies interested in buying us after we rebranded as Rosetta Stone Learning Centers, from Dean Morgan Academies to Rosetta Stone Learning Centers. And so we got offers from a lot of companies that were quite good. And that's where we pursued the discussion with Lincoln Motivation all the way to the point of being acquired.
Okay. Well, that must have been a good feeling after the let's say the wilderness years, that you were struggling.
But the early years are I think, to be honest, it's where your character is tested and where your character is built, right? Building a company and failing royally in the first part, it crushes you or you really find out who you are and who you want to be. And I think for me, it's probably the most valuable years I had. I value the years in the early years more in many ways than the success of selling. Right? To find who, for me, clear. I mean, there's a lot of hubris in my youth, right? I was 26, 27. I raised $1 million. We started it, and then, just failed royally. And it was a real education, an eye opener. And I wasn't the one who saved it. It was teachers who stepped up. I had every single teacher in our business when we were at that point where we were going to close down or not, one by one. They had met it with each other. They came to me and one by one said, I want to reduce my salary by 25%. I want to reduce my salary by 40%. I want to reduce my salary by 30%. My wife's got a great job. My girlfriend's got a great job. We live together. I can reduce by 20. And one by one, I was like borderline in tears. I mean, these guys were really passionate about trying to help save our business. And some of those people I gave stock to, and they did pretty well when we sold later. But that was the level of kind of commitment it took in some ways to get through this. And then I raised additional capital. I took no salary, and we were able to kind of retranche the company, get it back on stable footing. And it was a lot at the sacrifice of other people. A lot of those people were teachers who chose to give on their side to help me with the dream that I had, but also they liked what we were doing and where we were going and wanted to see it continue. And very thankful for that.
So it's been a theme throughout the interviews I've been doing is that nobody does it on their own, and it's the people around you. So tell me a little bit, besides teachers, friends, family, who's been there for you as regards mentors or backers?
So I'm pretty lucky when it comes to mentors. So on the mentor side, and I've definitely been proactive in cultivating relationships with highly successful people that I admired. And for me, probably the most powerful tool in doing that was golf. I'm a good golfer, high school, collegiate. And it allowed me to build relationships with people who were much more senior to me because I was a much better golfer and they wanted to go out and play. And it gave me a chance to get into kind of the business world at a very young age, including at 15, getting my first job at a money management firm. A lot of those kind of key relationships. And then a lot of the investors that I got at the later stage that were high net worth individuals came out of that network. So I think the mentor side and the expectations of mentors, one of the things I learned, and I now mentor other people, is you don't rely on mentors to give you the answers. Mentors are people you use as a sounding board rarely and conservatively, and then you make your own decisions. And any good mentor will expect you to make your own decision. You don't have to necessarily follow their advice. The best advice I got that I didn't listen to right before I launched the school is I went and met with my old boss, Alan DeBerry. He's a billionaire, super successful guy. He's on his $4 billion company now. We went on his yacht and I spent 2 days with him and I was telling about, raised all this money. It's great. I was interested whether I was going to be an investor. It's way too small for him. But he was more than happy to give me his time. I spent a couple of days at his house and on his yacht, and we were cruising around, and he gave me simple advice that I didn't listen to, and I should have. He said, it's all great, but why aren't you out like in a cafe building up a customer base of like 30, 40, 50 students before you open the door? Right? Just crank it out, get a customer base. Because the moment you open up that school, all your customers are going to be celebrating your success, and they're going to invite their friends, and it'll give you that rolling start that a new business owner needs. I got this money, I got the expectations, I got to do this now. And by the end of 7 months, we had 18 students, and we're tipping on bankruptcy, and I'm having to buy out my business partner and all this kind of stress. And it was the best advice, and I've given that advice to many other people who wanted to start their own schools. Don't start from zero. You can build a customer base on the side, get some momentum. And I think it's especially for the less sophisticated, and I was moderately sophisticated and still nearly failed, and I was well financed. But you need that consistent cash flow coming in. And, it was kind of the hubris that I thought I could do it without. And, I should have listened to Alan. I survived my own hubris, thankfully, and through a lot of other people's sacrifice, not just my own.
So tell me about dealing with hubris.
It's youth. You think you can conquer the world. Well, you're not as young as you once were, right? I'm not as young as I once was. I think, first of all, you educate yourself as much as you can. And I did that extremely well, or pretty well, I would say. But there's just that excessive confidence of youth, I think, that kind of made me make some rash decisions that I could have been a little bit more tempered, listened a little bit better to the mentors and the people who were more experienced than me. I did manage to survive it, thankfully, but yeah, the hubris of youth, I think, is more than anything where my mistakes really lie in those early years. I'm a lot more patient and focused in terms of looking at a plan and saying, okay, this is going to take 5 years. I want to be done in 3 years or 5 years. It's a long time, and you have to have the patience. And I think also the hubris of in my early years, very much about business wealth and growth and success. And, you haven't achieved as much in your life as you're hoping to at that point. And so the ambition portion as well drives you to make some rash and quick decisions. And, I definitely fell into that trap a little bit. And I think what changed for me is as I went through that hard period, I realized this is what I want to do. And success came easier when I focused on that. And I focused on the people and the business and the products fully and stopped thinking about success or recognition or any of these other things and really focused hard on the people and the business and customers. And that actually was very freeing, emotionally freeing from just the avarice, the I want to be this or I want to be that. And then the funny part is that it started actually manifesting the things that I wasn't focusing on them because I was focusing on the right things in building a business, which is the customers, the employees, the products that we were developing, and not my own ego or ambition. There was that's that useful. I think every youthful person has a little bit of that. I probably have more than most. Hubris to think I could do something big, first of all, and then the kind of hubris to run in and do it without maybe the depth of listening I should have to more experienced people, and doing it for the right reasons, I guess. I had the right reasons, but there was also surface of ambition and other things that I think that clouded my judgment at times. I knew it was right. I made the decision to go faster and, skip steps that I probably shouldn't have.
So one great takeaway from some business owners here in Japan, I've been hearing over the past couple of weeks, is there is a demand there already. There is already a customer base. I'm thinking, Haori-san, a few weeks ago, I interviewed, and she had a group of mothers, and they asked her to make a school, and she established a school. It all came together. But you didn't have that. You didn't have the customer base at the beginning. And that was
my biggest mistake.
Yeah.
Without a doubt. It would have been very easy for me, to be honest, was young, good looking, had all the right things I needed to just go out there. And I could have easily built a good customer base working at coffee shops and other places, not stealing from other schools, but just, the independent students. And the moment I opened up my own school, they would have celebrated. There's no question, right? Oh, I'm so happy for you. Bring your friends. And my old boss, Alan, his advice was incredibly sage. And it's a good first way. It's not that difficult. There's a lot of online sites where you can build these relationships, build up a customer base, 20, 30 people, whatever you think your kind of minimum requirement is to have some ability to cover your rent, utilities, and a small salary for yourself. You can get pretty close to that in maybe 3 to 6 months of really working hard to build up a private customer base and try and centralize that private customer base in the area where you're going to open your school. So it's easy for the customer to transition into your physical school. And that, it's like was a lesson hard learned. And, I wish I would have listened a little better. It probably would have accelerated our growth a lot because, we ended up spending most of that $1 million in the first year or so. And I would have had a lot more runway and cash to do a lot more things with that I burned through because of that kind of not listening and early hubris, if you will.
So if you were starting out now in this situation and you were looking at building that customer base, getting some loyal fans, how would you do it on a very small budget? Or
I think nowadays there's so many online teacher-student intro sites. You'd want to really polish up your profile, right? I think probably the one, if you're looking to run a business in a school, you need to charge a decent price for your lessons. And so there's a lot of casual teachers who I don't think dress appropriately for the kind of price they want. I'm a very good teacher. I've been teaching for 10 years. Well, students want, in many ways, think about the Japanese personality in particular, but it's true in other places. People tend to migrate towards brand, right? They want to buy brand. They want to feel secure in the brand. In particular, Japanese are this way. So even when I was out flyering, as an example, I always wore a suit and tie. I see teachers out there doing flyering and they're borderline pajamas and a t-shirt because they're a foreigner. I dress suit and tie always. And for me, it was like 100 flyers. I get one student. I go out and get 4 or 5 students in a day by being out there really well dressed, really polished. I spoke Japanese and English both, so I could flip over in the language and engage them. Keep building yourself up in the early stages because you are the kind of engine in the early days, right? You are the a lot of these things. And so I think building up that customer base, present yourself as someone who's really polished, put a lot of energy and effort into the quality of the lessons and the way you present yourself, find the right location to teach at. Don't be in a loud coffee shop that's really difficult for your student to have good learning in. Workout locations could be, some little tea shop or something that works out good and the owner's okay for you to be in there. But build up that brand from the moment you start as an independent teacher, and always build the quality brand that you want to be when you open your school, not once you get to your school, because you won't get there oftentimes. That was my point earlier, is you always got to work at the level. And this is true of employees. I mean, I say this to our would-be managers, for example, or people in management who want to become an executive, is you got to be performing at an executive level, and pushing yourself and being responsible like an executive level person when you're a manager. Or if you're a teacher, doing the extra things, not just doing your job. I mean, simply put, when you're doing your job, you're getting paid a salary. It's the people who go way above and beyond that get recognized and get the opportunity to maybe move up into the next step. And the people who are proactive in doing that, in the way they present themselves, the way they work. I think it's probably one of the most misunderstood things of how you progress in your career, just like how you progress in building a business, is you've got to work above what you're being paid. I wanted to be a CEO, but when I started our business, I wasn't. I was a teacher. Right? I made a mistake of not being a teacher and acting like a CEO, and it nearly cost me my business. And by the time I became I added one school and we had 3 or 4 teachers, I'm not a CEO yet. I'm a manager, realistically. And then as we got to multiple schools, and then we had 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 employees, by that time I was finally getting to the point where I would say I would qualify as a CEO. But I was looking to conduct myself at a level well above where I really was. But realistically, the work I was doing on a day-to-day basis was, a teacher. And so the people who get recognized quickly and progress quickly within our company, they're teaching, but they're people who reach out, see opportunity to help. They've got extra skills. They use those skills to benefit the business. They gather recognition steadily, and with patience, they're usually the people who advance more quickly. And I show up on time. I get good quality lessons. Why am I not getting promoted? Well, there's other people working harder than you that aren't recognized, and there's only a certain number of slots. And just doing the job generally gets you a salary, right? It's a nice exchange. It's the people who go above and beyond. I think in particular, owners have to have that mentality, is I've got to go above and beyond where I'm just at now. And so when you're teaching in coffee shops, don't show up in a t-shirt and a light sweater. Show up in a suit and tie, because that's what want to be. You want to be running your own school, and you want to be having a professional environment that people will pay top money for, and you should be presenting yourself in that way at an earlier stage, and you'll attract customers who will probably pay that money when you transfer into your physical location or school.
Fantastic. And as I read, I can't remember which book it was, but simply what branding is what customers think about your company, isn't it? Yeah. So you present yourself, you present your company, that's your brand.
Yeah, and brand. So if anybody ever has the idea of selling their business, right? In particular, brand impacts things like pricing, of what people will pay. Gap is a great example. They did a great job and have always done a great job with their branding. The value of a business is very much built around, especially a service business, around IP, intellectual property. I was very conscious when we were building our business. We sold the business for pretty hefty amount of money for having less than a dozen schools. We sold to Shane, who had 204 branches when they sold to ACO. Right, we sold for more than they did, and we had less than a dozen schools. We had technology way beyond. Shane was still faxing schedules, and you could only pay in cash or furikomi. Right, they couldn't take. We had our own textbooks that we had developed that were specifically focused for Japanese learners. And that were designed for man-to-man. Our scheduling technology was built to, run hundreds of schools. We had acquired the Rosetta Stone brand and rebranded our schools. We built the IP that created the bulk of the value and the value perception. And so students the same way. Why does someone go to Louis Vuitton and spend $1,200 for a wallet when you could walk down to the corner store and buy a nice leather one that works almost just as good for $20? Is it really 4,000 times better? Probably not. But brand creates value, and the intellectual property behind that brand, the IP, is oftentimes what really drives the value and the value perception, whether or not it's what the customer's paying or whether or not someone who wants to buy your business. And so you see small owners, the most common mistake when I get approached to, would you buy my school, for example, there's a couple of them, but the first one is, well, my students really love me and, I've done a really good job and, like I'm a great teacher and it's all about them. That's not a school I would ever want to buy, right? I mean, it's about fulfilling my young hubris kind of thing, right? It's like me kind of thing. And it's not scalable. And this is the moment they walk out the door. If that's true, then half the students are there because of them. There's no value in that business. So building a business beyond yourself is, to me, any good business owner should be focused on doing. You should look to make yourself irrelevant. But unfortunately, I think a lot of it's the self-gratification of students saying, you're so great. I wish we had more teachers like you. And, a lot of teacher owners are always complaining, like, these teachers can't do it like I can. It's so frustrating, right? First of all, if you're building something around you, then yeah, of course they can't do it like you. They're not you. I mean, that's just intrinsically so, right? They're never going to be satisfied, right? And making a bunch of clones of yourself is not gratifying for the employees who work for you either. They don't necessarily want to become you. So you've got to build a system and a methodology that allows the individuals to grow who work for you, but also encompass some key kind of components that are value focused on the student side, not on your recognition. And so people build businesses that don't necessarily scale well because they're not designed to scale. They're designed oftentimes for kind of self-recognition and for their way of doing things, and other people don't necessarily agree with that. And so you've got to build and find people who want to teach in that methodology or in that way and who agree with it and who are excited about your company's culture, building that culture, and making it in many ways teacher-centric in order to get the level of commitment and belief from teachers. And that's always been a big challenge in our industry. There's a lot of distrust. A lot of the reasons why I started this business is that I felt there was a huge business opportunity and an opportunity to do something good at the same time of trying to build a company that created opportunities for people to excel beyond just teaching, but also a company that was focused on recognizing the employees. And we're very imperfect in doing so, but I think we try a lot harder and we have a lot of good processes in place that do a pretty good job compared to many of the other companies out there, but we are imperfect. Please don't misunderstand it. I think we're a perfect place to work. We definitely have our, employees who aren't always happy with the way we do things. But we do a pretty good job of trying to find the people that match the culture that we're building. And I think that's also very important is if you've hired the wrong people and, they may have a great resume, but they're not right for your culture. It's wrong for them and it's wrong for you. And it's going to create a lot of friction. So finding the right people, the interview process is incredibly important as you start interviewing and hiring the first people that you hire within your company, and getting those right people who believe in the vision and who are excited about where you're going as a company, or the teaching style that you do is really important, because afterwards, if you're not on the same page, it just becomes a management nightmare and they're unhappy as well. It's bad for.
Mm-hmm. So you've made a few blunders there in hiring. Yeah.
Hiring's a tough one. We have a very thorough process. We go through about 4 different interviews before we get to me, and I'm the final interviewee still. Even the chairman of our group, Lincoln Motivation, still does all the onboarding interviews. And him and I are both of the same mind, is that, as long as we can continue to do this, there is no greater responsibility for a CEO than helping make sure that we're selecting the right employees for the company and for the existing employees, and also selecting the right person for that person. Not hiring someone who really will struggle to succeed in our environment. They don't match. They're not the right type of person. They may be fantastic at Google. They may be fantastic at Eon. They may be fantastic at Recruit, but they're not the right fit for our company and culture, and their expectations and what they want to do, or their timelines are way out of sync. And us trying to change them to match us is going to be a disservice to both parties. And the most experienced person in a company generally for doing that is the CEO. They've been around a long time. They've done, in my case, hundreds, thousands of interviews. You've got a good nose for it, and we've got good processes and questions that we ask that help us discern whether or not the match is going to be a good one. Because most of the people get to me all have the qualifications, right? I mean, they've passed previous interviews, and I'm really just looking to find the people that are going to blend in and succeed, both for us as a company and for their coworkers, but also for them. And saying no to somebody can be a really good service for them. I mean, if they're unhappy in our company. Now, I've made mistakes there. I'm sure I've said no to some people who would have been truly successful in our business. And I've definitely hired a few people who, ended up being very unhappy within our work environment, and choosing to eventually move on and being frustrated by their experience within our company. Thankfully, it's pretty few and far between, but definitely imperfect, to say the least.
But when you started out, you didn't have a round of 4 interviews, did you? How you just interviewed the teachers yourself, or?
Yeah, we did at least 2 to 3 interviews even in the early days. So I would have our like our kind of branch manager or assistant manager. We had a couple of teachers do the first interview. Then we'd have another teacher who is a very good teacher do a teaching demo lesson type of work with them, where they actually had to do a lesson, and then the final one would be with me. And usually split that into 2 separate days. Now it's more 3 to 4, and goes through our HR team, and it goes through they still do the teaching demo stuff where they have to plan out a lesson. We give them a possible student, the student type. How would you plan out this man-to-man lesson? They go through that process, and we can see how they plan out the education side. So we're looking at a series of different things: their teaching capabilities, their ability to plan lessons, their match for the company, just their responsiveness, right? I mean, we send out a questionnaire. You can see whether or not people are really interested in the company, or whether or not they're just, yes, I like it. No, like simple answers, or whether they're engaged, or, dear so-and-so, rather than, our company's name. We filter 95% of the people out before they even get to the interview process, just because they spam jobs to 20 companies. And, it's surprising. I mean, people who work in a company and people who run a company care about their company, and they want to take the time and energy to put effort into applying to this company, and, do their research and look into the company's history, and come in with intelligent questions, because it's a mutually selective process, right? Us selecting an employee should be selecting us. So when I do an interview, 50% of the time I'm asking questions, then I flip the interview around, and I have the prospective employee interview me, and usually one of our senior executives is with me, or senior managers is with me, and I give the ball over to them, because I think they should really ask questions that allow them to discern whether or not we are a kind of company that they really want to work for. And, it's weird how some people are uncomfortable. No, I don't really have any questions. Okay. You're talking about hopefully working here for quite a few years. There's no questions? Nothing? All right. Oh, I already asked them. Okay, what were some of the questions that you asked? And then what were the answers from that? And so I'm then able to kind of maybe expand on those answers that they had received from HR previously, and start to engage them and get them to ask better questions. And I honestly say to them, this is a mutually selective process. We're not just selecting you. You should be consciously choosing. There are other companies you can work for out there. Are we the one that you really want to work for? It's not just a job, right? I mean, you can make a lot more. You can make a career. You can do a lot that really builds your life. Or if you're just looking for a salary or an income, that's not necessarily what we're looking for. We want people who are engaged in the company, engaged in the employees that they work with, their peers, and engaged in the customers. And when they're kind of, oh, no, I'm fine. There's obviously the level of engagement, generally speaking, is going to be perceived as relatively low. And for us, that's got a certain degree of risk that we may want to mitigate by not hiring that person.
Mm-hmm. So some absolutely fantastic advice, Dean, today. Thank you very much for coming on. So just to wrap things up, I know you're busy, but what's for the future for you and your company?
For me and then for the company. So I've been, this is 17 years for me since I founded the company. We're now part of a big $1 billion publicly traded company. So for me, it's actually going from public company to starting my own company to returning back to a public company. And from my side, I'll get more involved at the executive level within the group. I now am the international IR officer for the group, so international investor relations, so helping grow the international investor base, which is an area where I always had good capabilities. For Dean Morgan and for Rosetta Stone Learning Centers, it's continuing to expand and grow in a flexible way, especially around COVID and online. So we had a good online business already before, but we're about 80% online now and growing in that. And we're expanding our pronunciation business quite significantly. I acquired a business called Hummingbird, which is a pronunciation business. That's become a major growth vehicle and continued to expand in new products and services, building and developing better and better curriculum and better technology. I think the foundation that we built the company on we have the capability to invest even more now, and we'll continue to do so as a company and look to kind of lead around technology innovation in the classroom and online. Great, even better curriculum that's even more focused and better designed for Japanese learners. And eventually taking our brand and our schools beyond Japan and beyond the borders of Japan. So eventually where we'd like to go. And having people on board who can help us do that would be is one of the things we're very conscious of now as we hire.
And for people who may think they're a right fit for you, as in, they have a company they want to sell, or they have some venture that you may be interested in, what are you looking for from potential partner?
For acquisition now, it's actually internally within the group, and the group's very acquisitive. I've acquired, as I said, Interact. Dozens of companies. So key metrics for the group are companies that mesh well with their core motivation engineering. So the group that we're part of, their core business is engagement surveys, employee engagement focus, which is one of the reasons it's the company we chose to sell to. It was very much in line with our kind of customer second mindset. This is a company that built its entire business on employee engagement. And the term link and motivation is the link between employee motivation and company results. And so they built their entire business, hundreds of $1 million business, several $100 million business around this. So I think any company that would integrate well with leveraging those kind of tools or what Lincoln Motivation is looking to do well. And so for us, they acquired us saying, okay, the language school industry, students get demotivated very easily. They struggle with it. So the motivation surveys, integrating that into our way of running the business and a way we counsel our students, which is something we've done to engage longer LTV, the students' retention, which in order to learn a language takes time, right? And so it's helped us to improve the length of student retention. And that's also helped with their language learning. And so then personally doing investments, I'm an investor in quite a few companies. I'm an LP, a limited partner in a venture capital firm as well now. I tend to look at acquiring or investing into businesses that I have some kind of involvement in. So helping found the business. If it's just money, it's not really engaging for me. So business that I can kind of sink my teeth into, serve as an outside board member, and get involved and add value above and beyond just money. Those are the things I personally invest into. I don't just really toss money into a business and hope and pray. I tend to have not a hands-on, but I can serve on the board. I can advise and help advise the growth long-term of the company is where I put my personal money, separate from the group.
Okay, fantastic. And if people want to get in contact with you, what's a good way? Are you active on social media? Do you have a Twitter account?
Really, I'm pretty private, generally speaking. But I think, maybe potentially through you. You've got a page where you're going to list this and people put comments. I could respond to those comments. I've done that in the past with some YouTube videos that Gaijin Pot and others posted. When people posted questions, I went ahead and logged in and responded to those questions on that platform. So I'd be happy to work through whatever platform you want to provide. If there's people who want to reach out or have questions that I can answer through that platform that you establish.
Fantastic. So we'll be publishing it on the magazine. We'll be on all the usual podcast platforms and YouTube as well. So, and we have a Facebook page and a LinkedIn page. So
so forward me the links afterwards. I'll track that. And anybody who has questions or criticisms, whatever, I'm happy to try to honestly respond back.
Great. Dean, thanks very much.
Thanks for listening to the EFL Magazine Business Podcast with Philip Pound. For more great advice and resources, check out eflmagazine.com. If you found this podcast helpful, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. See you next time.